It's finally time to assemble our VR5 engine. We got the block and the head back from the machine shop. Our old parts are laid out. The pistons are taking a bath. All our new stuff is ready to go. Now all I have to do is put it all together. I've probably already mentioned this before, but keeping clean and staying organized is the name of the game. Our pistons are in the ultrasonic cleaner, so those are doing their thing and they'll come out awesome like that one did there. The next thing we need to do is deal with our piston rings, and I made a board. It's right here. Our piston rings are pretty much the major reason why we ended up with this level of disassembly instead of just throwing chains on it. So I got new rings. These are from Mala. These are cool because they're labeled. The C piston ring is the top one. The B piston ring is the middle compression ring. And then the A ring, that's our oil control ring. For the rings, if we were doing boost, or maybe we had our cylinders overboard or something, the next step that I'm about to do would be vital. But stock block, the same pistons that came out of the block, it's a little less important. But I will tell you, if you're going this far, this is something you might want to do, and that's to check the piston ring end gap. Basically, what we want to do is measure the gap of the piston ring while it's in the cylinder, which makes a whole bunch of sense. So we have our 3 piston rings, and we want to check the end gap on each ring. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to show you one, and then if you're doing this, you can just use that same strategy for all the rest of them, because it's pretty much the same. So you're going to take your piston ring, you're going to make sure that the top actually is facing up. We're going to go into the cylinder perpendicular, and then we're going to go all the way almost to the bottom, and then flip the ring so that it sits in the cylinder the way it would if the piston were in there. Now, I sort of designed, but also did 3D print this little tool. This is gonna square up our piston ring. You don't need to get wild and crazy and do this. You can actually use a piston, but the problem with the VR6 is instead of the piston being flat, it's angled, which makes doing the piston ring a little bit trickier. So we're gonna take this, we're gonna put it in the cylinder, we're gonna square up the ring, then we're gonna measure the gap between the ends of the ring. According to the repair manual on this engine, you want to be 15 millimeters from the bottom of the cylinder. For the sake of our demonstration, I'm doing it at the top side of the cylinder. Otherwise, you'd never be able to see what I'm actually doing. We'll get our feeler gauge, and we're going to measure the gap. We're just gonna lay it right in the middle. All right, so we're at about 0.38 millimeters. Or 0.015 inches. Now, when you're checking that ring end gap, you want to either follow manufacturer spec or whatever performance thing situation you got going on. Our spec is 0.2 to 0.4 millimeters of gap with a maximum of 1 millimeter, which would be a huge ring gap. If you were running like 50 pounds of boost, maybe that's okay, but we're not doing any of that. So we're kind of on the higher end of the spec, which makes sense. It's a new ring, but you know, this thing had what, 200,000 kilometers on it, 120,000 miles roughly on it. So I think we're totally fine. I'm gonna only demo this one. I'm gonna do the rest because we'll be here for like an hour, and then we're gonna get all these piston rings cleaned up so we can put them on our pistons. Moving right along, time to deal with our crankshaft. I already did a lot of cleaning, just dousing this bad boy with cleaner, brake clean, acetone, the whole deal. But it's been a few days. Paul was here, so you know what that guy brings. So we're gonna do another job cleaning. Look at, remember I said I had already cleaned? Look at how dirty this coffee filter is. Just in a few days of dust, dirt, debris, or stuff I missed. Coffee filters make some of the best lint-free towels when putting an engine together. You'll notice while I'm doing this build, or reassembly is really more accurate, I'm cleaning things, making sure they're as clean as I can get them and dry. And then other things I'm cleaning, and then I'm gonna lubricate them. It is very important that you do the right thing on the right piece. But now I'm gonna start putting these main bearings in. What you don't wanna do is put these in clean and dry on the top and on the bottom, because then you're gonna have no oil the first time you roll this engine around between the bearing and the crankshaft. So you'd clean and dry on the backside, lubricate the actual bearing side. Because our engine looked great, I'm gonna go ahead and reuse the main bearings. We are putting new rod bearings in, mostly because the rod bearings are kind of a weak VR6 point, but these all seemed really good. And that, my friend, is 2, 4, 6 main journals. The next major thing we're gonna do is take our crankshaft, install it in our block. But before we do that, I said it a million times, we gotta clean it. So for this, I like to cut little strips, just like this. I usually like to clean the rod journals and the main journals, just to make sure we get it as clean as we can before we put it in the engine. Step 2, we need one of these dumb little red straws because nobody has developed a brake cleaner can like those awesome WD-40 cans with the red straw built into it. So these all go through the whole crankshaft, I believe. We're just gonna flush this out. Look at that, you can see it dripping. This is mostly just in case there's any like crusty carbon buildup inside the oil pathways of our crankshaft. If you didn't believe me when I said that the majority of your time assembling an engine is gonna be spent cleaning, here you go. We talk about a bearing and we talk about a crankshaft. Those two pieces do not actually ride together. They are not supposed to touch. They actually have a very tiny, tiny, tiny film of oil between the bearing and the journal of the crankshaft. That's what cools and lubricates the component. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna check to see what that gap actually is. Now, we're using the same main bearing, the same crankshaft. We've had no machine work done to it. If we have a problem, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So if you're rebuilding a Volkswagen Audi engine, I don't know if it's all of them, but it's a lot of them, and it's definitely the VR. And you need new main bearings. Technically, you can just get main bearings and you're fine. But if you want to do it by the repair manual, there's a code somewhere stamped on the block that you have to use to figure out what bearing goes in each location. That's the top side and the bottom side. They can be, I think, 3 or 4 different bearings, and they're color coded. On this front one right here, you might have a yellow bottom and a red top, and the next one might be the opposite. That's technically the proper OEM factory way to do it. Let's do some plastic gauge. So I'm gonna only do it on the front one, but if you're doing this, you wanna do it on all of them. So get a little sliver, look at that, just a tiny little piece of green. Take your little strip of wax and drop it. Oh, crap, I flung it. Where'd it go? Where the heck did it go? It's probably like stuck to my arm hair or something. All right, let's get another piece. Be careful with this stuff, because remember, this is basically just calibrated wax. We're gonna set it right at about 12 o'clock. Try and get it perpendicular. There we go. We're gonna set our cap on. Now, because you're gonna do all of them, you wanna follow the torque spec sequence for the crankshaft, which in general is working your way in to out. I usually use the old bolts, and I usually torque it to whatever the like number is. So in this case, it's gonna be 30 Newton meters. There's a plus 180 that you'll do when you do the final torque. You could probably do the plus 90 if you wanted to, but in my experience, just the torque number gets you where you need to be. If you're doing this, you're gonna feel like, geez, this is taking forever. I'm doing so much, and then I gotta take it back apart and put it back together again. I get it. Believe me, think about how cranky you're gonna be. Get it, cranky? Thanks, Dad. If you're annoyed about how long this is taking now, imagine how annoyed you're gonna be when you have to rebuild the whole engine again because you wanted to shortcut and not take your time and do it right. So keep that in mind. Okay, we're torqued. Our crank is chilling. We're now immediately gonna take it back apart. This is where we're gonna check our plastic gauge. But don't worry, the next time we put these on is gonna be new hardware, lube, and then we're done with it. Now, you're gonna take your little paper and we're gonna use it to see how big our gap is. Our oil clearance looks like it's a little bit more than 0.076 millimeters. So you can see the little scale right here, and then you can see our residue from the wax right here. That gives you your oil clearance. So our plastic gauge reading is gonna be 0.02 to 0.06 with a wear limit of 0.1. So while we're probably a tiny bit over, I imagine if we torqued that all the way down to 30 Newton meters, plus 90, it would push down a little bit more, pull us right in spec. We're close enough that I'm happy with that. As far as this little bit of wax, I usually prefer to clean it because we're right here. Why wouldn't you clean it? But officially, you can just leave it. Also, acetone is not feeling really great on my hands right now. Now it's time to start lubing. The LM48 is what I really like for these lube jobs here. It seems to stay where you put it a lot better than some other engine lubes. Here's another thing to think about. If you're worried like, oh my gosh, that's out of spec. We took an engine apart that had no bearing damage, no signs of like bad wear or anything like that. It was totally fine. So I think we're good. I'm gonna pull the rest of the caps off and we get to lube it up and start putting it back together. I got some new bolts for our main journals. These bolts are torque to yield, which means you're supposed to replace them every time you take them out. which is also why we didn't fully torque them when we did our plastic gauge measurement. A trick that I learned is that you actually are supposed to wash these bolts. A lot of times they're either sitting around and got dirt, grime, grease, whatever on it, a little bit of soapy water, and then we'll clean them the rest of the way. I get asked if I did this kind of stuff when I was at the dealer, like took the time to clean the bolts, and the real truth is we didn't do stuff like this as a dealership. If a car needed an engine, or if it's under warranty, it gets a whole long block. You don't do any of this kind of stuff, which I'm not terribly sad about because doing this kind of stuff on flat rates sucks. Whenever I'm putting mains in, I always try to do the one with the thrust washer first, or the thrust bearing. Oh God, that got a little excited. I try to do the one with the thrust washer first. What that thrust washer does is it controls the crankshaft moving front to back. There's probably a little movement up and down all the ways. Well, if you do it first, you can shift the crankshaft a little bit front to back. If you wait, now you have all the other caps in, preventing it really from moving much at all. So try to remember to do it first. Before I go any further, all I've done is snugged the main bolts down with my electric ratchet. I like to rotate the crankshaft around because if you have any kind of something hanging up now, you can fix it. You don't have to get new bolts. You don't have to tear the whole engine apart. We don't want to be a sad panda. 30 Newton meters is our first go round. I usually do like 20 just to get them a little bit more snug than whatever the ratchet does, which the ratchet was about 8. There is no incentive to rush here. Now we got to gear up to do our 180-degree turn. I grab a paint pen. I'm gonna mark all of these bolts at 12 o'clock. I then don't need a torque angle torque wrench. I can just look and see that I've turned it half a turn. This also says you can do 90 and 90, which I really like that. It's up to you how you want to do it. All those marks were at 12. I can look at that in 2 seconds and go, yep, everybody's torqued. I'm good to move on. Give it a spin. Feels great. There we go. When it comes to cleaning piston rings, I probably do this on a bit of an overkill situation, but it's how I learned to do it. And here's the deal. If you get something wrong here, the only way you know is when you have a catastrophic engine failure. And I don't want to risk having a catastrophic engine failure. First stage of cleaning is going to be hot soap and water. Next step, rinse off all of that soap. You don't want soap residue on your piston rings. The third step of that is probably the most important of the three, and that's dry the piston rings. Most of your piston rings are steel. If you leave them wet, they will rust, and you don't want to have rusty piston rings, so make sure you dry them very, very well. I also then spray them with some oil or Marvel mystery fluid just so we have yet another layer of protection against rust. Once all that's done, we can finally put our new rings on our piston. This is cylinder 1. We got our 3 rings. I work from the bottom up. So our first one is going to be our oil control ring. Now this oil control ring is 2 pieces. It's got the inner springy part and the outer ring. I don't think these have a top and a bottom side to them. It's been cleaned multiple times and soaked. There's still a bit of dirt on here. Really make sure you get this clean. We got our piston ring pliers. You can put them on by hand, but I actually like using these. Remember, when you're putting piston rings on, be real careful. These actually are kind of easy to break, and the last thing you want to do is crack a piston ring. Then you get to buy a whole new set of them. We'll do our middle ring next. This is a compression ring. I will say, if you build engines all the time and you have a recommendation on piston ring pliers, let me know, because I'm always looking for a better tool than this one right here, but this one, it works okay. I don't care about the orientation of the piston rings right now. It's totally fine. It doesn't matter right now. It will matter shortly when we go to put them in, but I'll show you that when we get there. You really want to make sure you clean these grooves in the piston where the piston rings sit. You don't want a big chunk of carbon or something in there. Then your ring's not going to seat all the way. You have compression issues or oil blow-by issues. So really make sure you clean that out. If you don't have anything to clean it with, take one of your old piston rings and just get it in there and scrub it out. If the carbon's really caked up in these ring grooves, it can be tricky to get it out. That Sonic Cleaner cleaned these really, really well, so I didn't have to do that. Just make sure whatever you gotta do and whatever way you do it, you get those clean. Before we can put our pistons in our block, I got new bearings and new bolts. Remember, torque to yield bolts pretty much everywhere, so if we take it out, we're probably replacing it. And what's funny is getting upgraded ARP bolts is pretty much the same price or sometimes less than buying factory replacement bolts. Rod bolts are also a weak point on the VR engines, so even though we're not doing a bunch of power on this engine, it's usually a worthy upgrade. I marked the top with what cylinder it was because I knew we'd be cleaning the piston. I also marked the alignment of the connecting rod and the connecting rod cap. Some VW engines are cold cracked, which means they only fit one way. These aren't, so it's a good idea to mark them to make sure you don't get them backwards. Now, I know marking things is not for everybody. I like to do it. It helps me not screw something up. This is a situation where you want clean and dry right here. Lint-free towel, coffee filter, whatever you prefer. Some acetone is what I like. You also want to clean the surface where the rod and the rod cap meet. If you have some oil between there, you may torque it down and it may not fully get torqued down, and you want to not have that. You know the drill by now. I've said it 100 times. The cool thing about putting an engine together is that the strategies and steps and tips that you would use for one part kind of apply across the board. So what I did for the main caps and the main bearings is the same thing I'm doing for the connecting rod and the connecting rod bearings. And putting together an engine can be intimidating. It doesn't hurt that I've done a lot of these. You know, if this were a V10 TDI engine, for example, my approach would basically be the same. So before we get our pistons put in, I'm gonna do another round of cleaning our piston holes, as Ray called them. Cylinder bores is what I'm gonna call them. And I'm just using some acetone and a coffee filter. It's been cleaned more than once, and we're still getting that much dirt out of there. So that's why I keep saying, make sure your business is cleaned. I'm feeling a little bit better about that. But what we may have done is knocked some stuff down onto our crankshaft. So we're gonna flip our engine back over, and we're gonna clean our rod journals on our crankshafts, just to make sure we don't have any yuck on any of the journals. When it comes to the VR engines, the block is very different. If you had a normal inline engine, it would be all the pistons lined up in a row, right? Because we have a VR, we have one cylinder head for all 6 cylinders. The bore, the hole, is not perpendicular to the deck of the block. Because we have only one cylinder head, our cylinders are angled. It presents a problem, however, when it comes to working with the block. One, the average machine shop can't overbore the block. In fact, I have an overbored 3.2 liter over there that I had to take to Bill Schimmel up in Pennsylvania because he's one of the very few people that can actually do this. The other problem is we can't use a normal piston ring compressing tool. We're trying to put a piston straight down into a hole that's angled. It can be done. I've done it with this exact tool, but it's a pain in the butt. The other way you can compress those piston rings to get them into the cylinder is to do it by hand. And if this way sucks, doing it by hand super sucks. Let me show you a special tool that Volkswagen has. It's angled, so it allows you to put the piston in at the same angle that the cylinder bore is, like this. However, this one's for an 84 millimeter piston. We have 81 millimeter pistons. So, our friends at Tectonics have these. This is a piston ring compression tool that has been cut down so that it can match the angle of the cylinder bore. They have a bunch of different sizes of this, so if you're building a VR, this may be a tool you want to invest in. I have never used this tool. I've used this one. We've built some 3.2s with this thing. Even though this is a factory Volkswagen special tool, it's kind of garbage. So, coat the inside of the tool with some Marvel Mystery, or engine oil is fine too. This is where we're going to align our piston rings. What we want to avoid is these gaps to all be lined up. What's going to happen is compression is just going to blow right past that. It's probably going to run, but it's going to run terrible. So you basically want these 120 degrees off. The top compression, the middle compression, as well as the oil ring all need to be separate. We're going to take our rod cap off. Take a little oil as well. This is where you don't need to worry about it being dry. You want to have this pretty well lubricated up. You might have to compress the rings a little bit. You just want to be really careful here. If you start whacking the crap out of that, you're probably going to break a piston ring. And look, I'm being a little extra cautious right now because I've never used this tool before. Took me a second to get it lined up, but you're about to see one happy Charles. Oh my God, that was so awesome. Here's the deal. I've rerung and rebuilt a lot of VR6 engines, and everyone has provided their own struggle around the piston rings. This tool, I gotta tell you guys, I think this is a must. I will be, as soon as we're done filming this, ordering one for a 3.2 liter because this is awesome. That piece of junk plastic one from Volkswagen was probably the same price as this, and this is 1,000 times better. So ups to these guys. I'm gonna just revel in that celebration for a second because I'm so excited about how that actually went down. I hope that what I just said comes across as genuine as I mean it, because that was awesome. And I think you can only feel that way if you've like proper struggled with something just the best. Now, where we're at, you have a couple of choices. We can just go ahead and put the rod cap on, little lube, rod cap, tighten it down. If you want to do something like check your oil clearance on your connecting rod, you're gonna do it exactly like you did on the main journals, right? You can use plastic gauge, or you can use a bore gauge and a micrometer to take those measurements and do the addition. We're stock for stock, so we're just gonna put it back together. Let's get our cap on. I marked it cylinder 1 with an arrow pointing forward. That forward is to the harmonic balancer. Already got our lube on there, so we're just gonna set that in. Next up, we gotta deal with our bolts. If you're using factory bolts, your process is gonna be a little bit different. You basically just torque it. We are using ARP, so there's a couple of different things we need to do. We need to get some of our Ultra Torque lubricant on there. We're lubing 2 places on these bolts. Spot number 1, the threads. The other spot is on the bottom head of the bolt. We're gonna snug those down by hand. You do kind of need to tighten these a little bit at a time. I'm not gonna actually like tighten it down just yet. If you got these new, you got this little piece of paper. Torque it to a certain torque spec. In our case, it's 40 pound-feet, or stretch the bolts to 0.0075 to 0.008. Before I started, I took one of the bolts, and you'll notice there's a little recess in the top and in the bottom, a little divot there. Now, as you tighten the bolt, it's gonna stretch just a little bit. I mean, think about it. Our tolerance is very small, and 2, the amount of stretch is very small. So we've measured, we've zeroed. I'm not gonna do this way. I'm gonna just torque it to the 40 pound-feet and we're gonna call it good. I've tested this on other VR connecting rod bolts, and it's 39 to 40 pound-feet gets you right into the spec. But I wanna show you how to do this and what it looks like, because I think it's a cool thing to know. Push it down, swing it into the divot in the bolt. Now, I like to give it a little wiggle woggle just to make sure we're in there all the way. Zero it out. If you're gonna use this, you wanna start below the spec that they gave you on the paper. So for our case, maybe we start at 35 pound-feet and check our stretch. 20. All right, so we're gonna do 40 now. At 40 pounds, it barely moves the needle. But you would basically just measure this stretch and try and hit your target, right? Whatever that little paper says, that's what you want to chase. All 5, exactly the same. Let's put the rest of these things in and I'll shut my stupid mouth and get to work. All our pistons are installed. Something I want to point out that I also did is, in addition to marking the main caps after I torqued them, I went ahead and marked the rod bolts as well. Now we get to see the cool pistons in action. We have reached a point in time where we get to put our cylinder head on. We want to make sure we got everything cleaned, no yuck in our coolant jackets. I had the block and the head machined. And what they do is they just make sure this surface is flat, head surface is flat, so then when you made them together, they made together properly. If you have a VR, it's important to make sure you bolt the cover as well as on the cylinder head, because if they machine the deck of the block, but don't machine the cover, you might have a couple thousandths of cover sticking up. Don't risk it. Send the cover as well. We also want to make sure we don't have any oil. Clean, dry. You might have noticed while I was blowing this surface off, trying to get any like remaining lint in that, you saw in 2 bolt holes this poof, water, oil, whatever, and you don't take it out. When you go to tighten, you basically create a little mini hydraulic press, and it's gonna shear off this edge of the block. And there's some things you can do to overcome your own boo-boos in this world. That one makes for a real bad day. Now, if you're a welder monkey 69, you probably could fix it yourself, but most of us aren't, and that makes for a real bad day, especially on an engine you can't just like run to the junkyard and get another one. Now earlier I mentioned I like to clean the bolts before I use them, and some of you looked at those bolts and you're like, bruh, come on. Let me show you a little bit of an alternate scenario. Look at these bolts right here. I mean, I don't know how old these are. I wish I would have saved the cardboard box because it looks like the, your dog ate your homework kind of situation. So we definitely need to clean these. Little bit of dish soap, some hot water, and we're just gonna drop these in. Agitate. Look at all that dirt. Now, is dirt on a bolt that big of a deal? No. It's not. But what we don't want to do is have a piece of something in the threads. We go to tighten it, the piece of thing gets all yucked. Now we have stripped threads. I use the analogy, we're not making microchips here, but we want it clean. Oh, apparently you don't have to use nuclear hot water. These tall ones are really bad. So I'm just gonna run a thread chaser just to make sure we don't have any yuck on these bolts. What you're about to watch me do, I do not recommend you do this. That's why you don't want to do that. See how I got caught? My cat-like quickness prevented injury. I do think this is probably a bit overkill, but I just don't want to run into any problems. Oh yeah, you can see the dirt coming out of this one. Look at how yucked that is. But these are in fact, the nastiest head bolts I've seen. I'm gonna fire up the compressor, we're gonna dry those bolts, I'm gonna dump this nasty yuck water out, and then it's gonna be time to bolt the cylinder head on. I also will say, in a perfect world, what I would actually do next is put the oil pump on and then put the cylinder head on, because maneuvering this thing around on this engine stand kind of sucks. The problem is I don't have the gasket yet for the oil pump. We couldn't find one, even though there was clearly one on there. So we're gonna make one. I'll show you that in a few minutes. But for now, let's get these bolts dried off and get our cylinder head dealt with. Even though it was cleaned at the machine shop, you can see this griminess right there. Look at how dirty that is. We're gonna get all that yuck off of there. I also blew the whole cylinder head out with compressed air. Anytime you get something back from the machine shop, you want to do that. And the last thing you want is that little bit of aluminum stuck in a coolant jacket, and then all of a sudden it's stuck in your radiator. So bad times. Here's our head gasket. There's only 5 holes in it. We need one more thing that we got to do, and that's install these little alignment dowels. A cool little tool to do that with, a pair of spark plug wire pliers. When you do a head gasket, be careful. This is a metal one, so you got a little bit more flexibility, I guess. The paper ones you gotta be super careful with. You have this whole space overhanging. I had seen a guy do timing chains, I think on a Touareg VR, and he totally borked up that head gasket, ended up having to pull the engine, do a cylinder head. It was a whole big thing. So be super careful because this sticks out just like this until we bolt our rear covers on. Here, okay. Here we go. This is a we're never going back to Coco moment. Be real careful here. You don't want to scrape your head across the gasket. Luckily, I'm a professional and I've only put a head gasket on upside down one time. Frankly, I blame Paul for that, but I was gonna blame Paul either way. These bolts have 2 different sizes, as you obviously saw. The outer ones are the small ones. The inner ones are the tall ones. What is important on pretty much every cylinder head job is that you follow the torque spec, and as if not more important, the torque sequence. So we got this little paper, it tells us the order as well as how much to torque it to. If you have the repair manual, which if you're doing a job like this and you do not have the repair manual, you're wrong. You need to make sure you tighten some of this stuff down properly. So that's 50 on all the bolts. Normally at this point, I like to go back and just double check them all. The order doesn't really matter because they should all be tightened. Look at this, I get a little movement at 50 because as you tighten everything down, some of these may pull the head down a little bit and you may find some of the early ones you did are a little loose. I mean, I'm getting barely any movement on these, but I like to double check it. Our next torque sequence is going to be 90 degrees, all the bolts, then another 90 degrees, all the bolts. To make sure I get them all and make sure I get them all 90 degrees, I'm gonna put pink marks at 12 o'clock as I'm looking at it. That way we can, at a glance, see if it's tight, just like we did with the main caps. It's pretty much the same exact thing. I gotta put my rockers in, pluck them out, and pluck them in. As I understand it, one of the most problematic areas for engines when you first start them up is dry camshafts. And so we're gonna make sure we lube these babies up. We're moving right along. We're doing real nice. Here's our intake cam. The red juice that I've just spraying on there is Marvel Mystery Oil. If you've never smelled Marvel Mystery Oil, it smells so good. I love it. On the end of our camshaft here, these are oil control rings. These control rings are very easy to break, so you gotta be extra careful when you're putting your cam gears on. You wanna make sure you treat them similar to piston rings and not line the grooves up all in one row. When we tighten our camshafts down, it's gonna open certain valves. So what I always do is I rotate our engine to TDC and then I back it off. What that does is that makes sure none of the pistons are all the way up. This isn't gonna be like a proper timing situation, but it's gonna get us close. 5 Newton meters plus 1/8 of a turn. We're gonna get our plate in and lock our camshafts. TDC, cylinder 1, exactly where we wanna be. Now we can finally time this thing. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put our cam bridge with our cam variator solenoids in it. This little alien looking guy is our bridge. These are our solenoids for our cam adjustment. Make sure you don't have any debris inside this screen. This whole bridge is only 8 Newton meters. This is our relay shaft. It slides in this hole and then this gear drives another gear, which then drives our oil pump. So this is actually a really important part. This is our tensioner. This little guy is a little bit of like a grenade pin, so you wanna be careful with that. In fact, normally I zip tie that on. We can kind of put this on like that. All right. We got our lower chain on. This hardware is all one-time use technically. If you decide you want to 2-time use it, just throw a little blue thread locker on it. This intermediate gear, the outer one, was pretty worn, so I had another one that looked way, way, way better. So I just went ahead and used that, and of course, new bolt. But I think I used the other back gear too, the one that drives the lower chain. Upper chain's next. Pretty straightforward. You do have some special thing you need to do with the variators. I don't love that this chain goes through the head gasket. Now I will tell you there's been times where I've had to take these off and put them on a couple of times because things just don't go right, or you get it up here and you're a tooth off. It happens, right? Like look, I think I said earlier, I've done 150,000 VR timing videos. Don't sweat it. Don't beat yourself up about it. When it comes to the variators, this is the exhaust one. There's a couple of really important things. This little nub right here lines up with the middle hole in the camshaft. If you get it wrong and you don't get it seated like in the right spot, what'll happen is when you go to tighten it down, you'll smash that nub and your camshaft won't be indexed. You will have timing problems. You will have also ruined whatever $300-something variator, and you likely have damaged the camshaft. So you need to be super careful. So it's gonna be 16 rollers between the marks on the cam, and you'll be able to see that in a second. That's on there, hand tight. Technically, we are timed. When you think you have this timed correctly, you need to roll the engine around a couple of times to double check. What I do now is I zip tie the tensioner basically closed like that. And we'll rotate it around by hand 2 full revolutions, and then we'll double check our marks. We'll see if our plate fits, and if it does, we're in time. I'm looking for my shaved down tooth to line up with the main cap. So our crankshaft is set to TDC. The links in the chain will not line up. It's legit like 60-something revolutions before all your timing marks line up and your links on your chain line up. So don't worry about the links. Only worry about the timing marks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Boom, we got it. We should be 100% perfectly on time. That's it. Let's tighten down the rest of these bolts, tighten everything down, then we'll get our covers put on. We're making some progress. I'm gonna leave this zip tie on until we're ready to put the upper cover on. You don't have to, it's totally fine if you don't. I'm gonna get our covers ready so that we can put our lower cover on with the new rear main, our upper cover on with 2 new cam solenoid seals, and then the little O-ring that goes right here for our oil plug. With the oil pan off, you can very easily maneuver around the rear main seal. Nice and dialed in. 8 neutrons. That's when you get the Paul install option. You have to hashtag put it in Paul. We do the same thing for the upper cover. We do the same thing for the front. After I get those on, I'm gonna flip it around and we'll do the oil pump, but legit, it's exactly the same. So here it is now, this is it done. Ready? I put 5 bolts in. Go. Turn around every now and then. I put a timing cover on and then I do a front crank cover. Front cover on. I got a new crank bolt. Because I'm not gonna tighten that down yet, I'm gonna put the old one in, but we're making good progress. I'm excited. The hard part is done. So we're gonna do a time lapse of putting all the rest of this stuff on. If something goes wild, I'll stop and I'll show you the craziness. Something I find kind of wild about doing stuff like this is there are times where you will work for a long stretch of time and you look at your situation you have happening here, and you're like, I've just worked for an hour and a half and it feels like and looks like I did absolutely nothing. Then there are times where you work for like 7 minutes and you go from a bare block to having all of this stuff on, because this is all just nuts and bolts. So now when the oil pump goes on, I have something that I always do on my VRs before I finish them. And that's pressurize the whole oil system. So we'll have oil getting pulled up from the pan, through the pickup, through the block, up to the cylinder head. Even though we have all the assembly lube up top, that's great, and you should do that. But if you can find a way to pressurize the oil system, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Everything you can do to avoid damage on that first key fire, you should probably do. While I'm putting this stuff on, I want you to pay attention to 2 things. 1, things have to go on in the right order, otherwise you're gonna take it back off and then have to put it back on. 2, notice how different some of these parts look, especially the oil filter housing. Here's a really fun side-by-side of before when we took it off and after with it going on. It'd be awesome if it was beautiful and shiny, sparkly, but frankly, we're running out of time here. I'll share with you in a few minutes of kind of where we are in the timeline of the Lupo project. What I do know is I gotta get moving on this thing. You're probably gonna notice I'm only breaking this torque wrench out for one part. That's the knock sensor. While I get the oil pan tightened down, I want to share with you something that I'm kind of uneasy about, and that's the timing of this engine. Look, I've done dozens of VR6 timing chains, never had a problem, so some of this anxiety and fear that I'm kind of experiencing right this minute may be unwarranted, but I'm not sure why. I just have a little bit of a feeling that maybe I got the timing wrong. I did go back and double check it, and according to all the checks, it's right. Unfortunately, you sometimes don't know exactly until you get it running. It's probably gonna be fine. I just wanted to share with you guys that even though I've done this dozens and dozens of times, there's still some anxiety sometimes about these jobs that you do. And so if you do a job on your car and you're feeling nervous and you've went back and double checked your work, you're probably gonna be okay. I guess we'll find out once we get this in our Lupo and running and all that. I just hope we don't have to take it all back out and retime it. The next thing I'm about to do is super cool. So we have this shaft right here that goes in what I think is actually an old distributor hole. This shaft connects to the oil pump inside the oil pan. Typically it's driven by this gear, which is driven by that intermediate shaft, and then that drives the oil pump. We are gonna prime up our oil system so that the first time we fire this car up, we don't have a potential for oil starvation. Now, a couple of keynotes. One, you gotta put your flywheel bolts in, otherwise oil's just gonna leak right out of the crankshaft hole. Two, you don't wanna go super fast here, otherwise all that's gonna happen is oil's just gonna puke out of this hole right here. So I'm just gonna go real slow. It may take a few minutes, but eventually you'll get oil up to the top. Since we're right here, this is the gear that actually drives that oil pump. So I'm gonna put that guy in, and then we can just put this cover on too. Before we get our valve cover on, spark plug time. Now, you've seen me tighten a lot of things on this engine, and you've seen me not use a torque wrench an awful lot. I am by no means a every bolt must be torqued down type technician. Obviously, the important ones like internal engine stuff, I think you need to get your clicky boy or your buzzy boy out. But for the most part, you kind of can wing it, I think, on a lot of stuff. However, spark plugs are a place where I always put a torque wrench on it. We're gonna tighten our plugs, or 20.3 neutrons. Check out how our valve cover came out. This is just in that sonic cleaner. For these valve covers, we just put 2 dots of sealant right on the break of the upper timing cover. You don't need to go crazy with it. This is something you gotta make sure you get right too, because it's a big lift to get to it after you're all back together. Also, the last time we did a VR valve cover, this happened. Woo! All right, hopefully my wife didn't see that. So there's 2 main reasons why I didn't powder coat this valve cover. One, time is not on our side at this point in like the overall scope of the project. So things like that just sort of take a back seat. The other reason, and the reason why I'm not really stressing about not getting this thing powder coated, is that you're not gonna really see any of this once the intake manifold's on, once the engine cover's on, and the car's all together. For our injectors, we have our new seals. These injectors have 3 seals, one that goes into the rail, one in the block, and then one at the bottom of the block. I think this is actually a place where air blows through, but I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure. So if you wanna reseal an injector like this one, it's super easy. I just take a razor blade, cut off the seals. This one stayed in the rail. If you watched the Scirocco series that Paul and I did, VR6 fuel injectors can be the bane of my life. Let's hope these don't have a problem. That little pile of goo right over there, that's dielectric grease. That's what I like to use to lubricate these seals for the injectors. Legit, it's just as easy as you're watching me do this right now. 1, 2, 3. We'll put a little dielectric on each of these when we go in, and then our injectors will be happy and not VR6 sadness injectors. No junkyard trips for these, hopefully. For our injectors, remember these had 3 seals on them with this kind of weird open space. Well, it is a space that has a little air pocket. You can kind of see in that hole right there, there's like a channel. That channel goes to this vacuum connection right here. My assumption is that's to help better atomize the fuel as it goes into the cylinder. We also need to pay attention to the orientation of the injector and where it is as far as the connector. So I grabbed the harness, just kind of held it up there to be sure we had it in the right spot. Looks like our lower ones, the connector faces up, and our upper ones face down. I double checked on the 3.2 liter and it doesn't have that extra like vacuum line thing. So I'm wondering if the 2.8 has it. To lube the injectors up, this is what I use. Just a tiny little bit on the seal. Generally helps them pop right in. Also a little tip, if you're doing any kind of fuel injectors, double check your fuel rail and make sure no seal got left behind. Much like double gasketing an oil filter, you don't want to double seal a fuel injector. For the clutch, it's nothing fancy, a single mass flywheel, and basically a stock VR clutch. Remember, this car's not gonna make a ton of horsepower. We're not adding boost, at least not now, so a stock clutch will be just fine. But we are doing the single mass flywheel, which should save us a little bit of rotating mass weight, and frankly, they're cheaper and they don't fail like dual mass flywheels do. So remember, these have thread locker on them. They have to have that, otherwise you're probably gonna get oil leaking past the bolts. Before you put your clutch disc in, you better clean your flywheel. Look at how dirty that is. Here's the order this goes in. Flywheel, friction disc, pressure plate, and bolts. It's super important when it comes to your friction disc that you tighten it evenly across the center, exactly like you would if you were tightening down a wheel. A little bit at a time, crossing the center, because it's slowly gonna push the pressure plate onto the flywheel. If you do all one bolt all at one time, it'll get the whole thing twisted, and you may end up with a bad, sad clutch. It may also not be a problem, but it's not worth the risk. I had to get the intake manifold on just so I could see how awesome our engine looks now that it's all clean and all together. This is what it looked like before, kind of a hot mess, and now it looks awesome. I did not, however, bolt it on because it was gonna have to come off anyway. As we move closer and further into the Lupo project, I still have so much work to do. I have wiring harnesses on the floor, the car's tucked under the R32. There's so much. I don't even really know where the heck we're at with it, to be very, very clear. But what I do know is next time you see this thing, it's gonna be getting slammed into a Lupo GTI, and it's gonna be good.